Hello language learners! If you are at all interested in learning Spanish, have you asked yourself which type of Spanish should I learn? And if you haven't, you should probably think about it now. And if you have, good, you're on the right track to being really intentional about your language learning. And intentional is key. Let's back up. Why is this question important? Why should we care? I mean, Spanish is Spanish, right? Not necessarily. If you ever want to travel abroad to a different country, immerse yourself in Spanish, be a tourist in a Spanish-speaking country, any number of things. First of all, different countries and different regions in those countries speak in different Spanish accents. Their speaking is different, their vocabulary is different, their grammar is different, any number of differences between different Spanish-speaking accents. So if your goal is to ever go abroad to work on your Spanish or just to travel, thinking about where you want to go is really important with how it relates to how you're learning it. If you're using Castilian Spanish resources, but you're never gonna go to Spain ever, it's not necessarily a waste, but it's going to hold you back a lot. Or if you don't even really want to travel abroad, which is totally fine, totally okay, the Spanish language learning resources that you use, depending on the resource, they might not cater to the accent that you want to learn. Some resources only cater to Latin American Spanish, that's the most common one I think. Some of them only cater to Castilian Spanish, some of them cater to both, but it really makes a difference because you could be tested on vocabulary that you're not really comfortable with, you don't have any interest in learning, or the audio might be different. It really depends. When Spanish language learning resources teach more than one Spanish-speaking accent, it's proof that it really matters which one you're learning. Or think about it this way, if you are learning Spanish through different movies, different TV shows, stuff like that, they're only using one kind of accent. And not every form of media, not every movie, TV show, song, whatever, is from the same country, which means they don't all have the same accent, which is going to make it more difficult for you to understand what's going on, more difficult to use the information that you're learning with your Spanish language learning goals. And the biggest number one issue why it's important is vosotros and vosotras. There's an entire country, i.e. Spain, that uses that. It's an entirely its own grammatical concept that nobody else uses. If you're planning on interacting with Castilian Spanish like at all, you need to understand vosotros and vosotras. It's not difficult, it's really simple, but it's important. Castilian Spanish uses it, nobody else does. It's a really important thing that if you get thrown into Castilian Spanish with media or talking to somebody or something and they use vosotros, vosotras, you're gonna have no idea what's going on. It might prove to be another obstacle for you if you see an entirely new grammatical concept and it turns you off and you're scared about it, you're scared of it, you don't want to learn it, you think you can't learn it, you know, any number of things. It's really important to keep that in mind and be intentional about which version of Spanish you're trying to learn and surround yourself with. You know why it's important. How do you know which one to choose? That's a personal question. I wouldn't put a whole lot of emotional effort into it. Don't freak yourself out, don't psych yourself out if you haven't made that decision. It's fine. Spanish is Spanish at the end of the day. They're very similar. But if you can make that decision for yourself, I suggest you do. I mean, I personally like Castilian Spanish because, like I talked about in this video, I got most of my Spanish knowledge by living in Spain, which is Castilian Spanish. If I interact at all with, you know, Latin American Spanish, they use a lot of vocabulary, which is unfamiliar to me. It's just different vocabulary. It's hard for me to understand when they speak. It's a whole different thing. If you're a beginner or even getting to intermediate, how do you decide which one you want to focus on? It could be a matter of which version of Spanish is easier for you. If you went to school in America and you learned Spanish in high school and college, the Spanish you learn is Latin American Spanish. If you want to keep going with that education, Latin American Spanish is going to be much easier for you. If you want to build off that education that you already have, you're going to want to focus on Latin American Spanish. Or if you really want to travel to Europe, this is, you know, my version of it. If you want to travel to Europe, Castilian Spanish is what you want to go to. They speak Castilian Spanish in Europe, in Spain, if traveling to Europe is your goal. Or if you're in North America, if you're an American and you do want to travel abroad, but going to Europe is really far, really expensive, all totally valid reasons to not go to Europe, Latin America is right there. It's right there. It doesn't take much to get there. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot closer to home. So if you want to travel but you value being closer to home for any number of reasons, then Latin American Spanish is your answer. Or if you live in the US and you want to learn Spanish by talking to native Spanish speakers who live here, again, that's going to be Latin American Spanish generally. If you're going to be talking to people in your neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods, it's going to be Latin American Spanish. If you want to learn Spanish online and you have a budget, this is a big thing. If you have a budget, then Castilian Spanish is going to be more expensive, just because the way different economies work. Latin American economy isn't as strong as a European economy. Native speakers from Latin America are going to be much more budget friendly than European Spanish speakers. You can find speaking practice from like $5 an hour from a Latin American speaker if they live in Latin America. If you want a fairly high quality Spanish speaking teacher but you don't have a lot of money, that's a pretty good idea. Go to italki, go to Verbally, links below in the description bar to find out more about those. If you want high quality one-on-one practice, if that's something that's really important to you, but you don't have thousands of dollars, not thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars is probably a better estimate, just, you know, depending on what you're looking at. Latin American Spanish is probably your go-to. So there's a few reasons, a few, you know, little things to think about when it comes to what kind of Spanish you're practicing and surrounding yourself with. Now keep in mind that, you know, I've been basically talking about Castilian Spanish and Latin American Spanish. Those aren't the only two accents. If you look at a map of Latin America and you see all the Spanish-speaking countries, they all speak a different accent. They're probably going to be more similar to each other than they are to Castilian Spanish, but they all have different accents. Thinking about where you might want to go, things like that, which accent you prefer, that might dictate where you're going for your Spanish practice. Castilian Spanish is the same. I say Castilian Spanish, which is Spanish from Spain, but depending on the region of Spain that you go to or the person you talk to, their accents are also really, really different. Different language learning resources will give you Castilian Spanish or Latin American Spanish. That's a very broad separation between Spanishes, and they don't talk about the different regions within Spain, the different regions within Latin America. There's a lot of differences that you should keep in mind and you should educate yourself about, definitely. Castilian Spanish, usually when you're looking at Spanish language learning resource, is usually talking about more central Spain, so Madrid, which is where I went to learn Spanish, which is what I'm comfortable in. If you go to northern Spain or southern Spain, the accents are very, very different. And even in certain regions of Spain, they don't even like to speak Spanish primarily. They like Catalan. Like if you go to Barcelona, it's an entirely different language. To an untrained ear, to an untrained Spanish learning ear, it might sound like a different accent. It is not. Catalan is a completely different language that's related to Spanish but is very different. That's a great way to offend somebody from Barcelona. Just letting you know. It is a different language. Some language learning resources do teach it, which is great. It's not nearly as common as Spanish because it's a much smaller area. So there you have it. That's something really important to think about when it comes to approaching your Spanish language learning. What you plan on doing with your Spanish, if you plan on traveling, what kind of budget you have, what kind of media you want to surround yourself with. All these different things is really important to think about and apply that to your Spanish. You can just kind of use Spanish haphazardly and be around Spanish haphazardly and get yourself familiar with a ton of different accents. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It might get a little confusing because, like I said, there's different translations for different words that might confuse you, trip you up. In the long run, it'll probably leave you in a better place because you could go to most any Spanish-speaking country and fit in decently well, understand decently well, get much more familiar. But in the short run, it could be really confusing. Think about it like English. American English, like the English I'm speaking, is a lot different from British English, from Irish English, stuff like that. Irish English. Oh, that is right. But it's really confusing for people who are learning English for themselves for the first time. And even in America, the English that I speak is a lot different from the Southern accent, from New York accent, stuff like that. Think about it like that. It's very, very similar. Just like the US is huge and holds a lot of different accents, a lot of which we can't even comprehend. We don't even see the difference. Same with South America. South America is just entirely different content with different countries in it that speak different versions of the same language, use different vocabulary. Think about like soda and pop, different words for the same thing. We recognize it, we understand it pretty well. People who are learning English don't. there's a difference. Think about it like that. I hope this was helpful for you. If you're approaching Spanish language learning for the first time, or you're still in the beginner stages, or even if you're more intermediate advanced, it's a good thing to think about and being intentional about who you're trying to approach and who you're talking about. If you want to expand on your education, expand on your accents, it's a really good idea to think about, what kind of Spanish you're used to, and maybe go on Hello Talk, find somebody from a different country and talk to them, and really expand your Spanish. That's all I have for today. Remember, you can find me every single Monday on my blog at crashculture.com, and every single Wednesday and Sunday right here on YouTube. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week.